The great danger of anxiety is you have to deal with it. You can't ignore it. It's so destructive to your body, and the worst way to react to it is to go to ritualistic behaviors. I can walk through a med school and I see someone highlighting their book, and I just want to slap the pen out of their hand. You're always going to have some degree of anxiety. Don't feel like a failure because you've recognized that you have anxiety, you don't know what's expected, and you feel overwhelmed. All of us did that. So the first thing is, yes, it's real. The second is, it's extremely debilitating. You have to strengthen yourself for it. And one of the mistakes students make is they say, oh, I get to go do something really fun because I've earned it. No, you haven't. You get to go have fun because it recharges you.
Dr. Tisdall, I want to talk to you today about stress and anxiety. As someone who went through pre-med myself and law school and a full career, I know those feelings very well, and I'm not sure I ever really figured out how to deal with them. So the first thing I want to start with is really framing it into context in medical school. So when a medical student says they're anxious, what do you think they're actually anxious about?
Well, let's just set the stage first. So it's hard to remember medical school back in 1972, except sort of in general platitudes. But what I do know is when I started teaching internationally, the old pros that I was working with said, the first thing you have to deal with in any exam prep is anxiety. If you don't do that, nothing else matters. So from the very first moment I started teaching for exam prep, that's been on the front of my mind. And this is how I've come to think about it. I think you have to very sharply differentiate between anxiety and tension. Now, understand, these are very old historic words. Everyone's allowed to have their own definition. So I'm going to specifically use them in the medical student context, and others can disagree. I think anxiety is when you have high stakes, but you don't know what's expected. I think tension is when you have high stakes and you do know what's expected. So, for example, a good example of tension, I always end up with the jocks. And, I always say to them, it's like going into your championship game. You know that it's high stakes and you know exactly what you've got to do to execute your game plan and your responsibility. The problem that I know medical students face is they're going into their high stakes step one, $100,000, $200,000 in debt. And if you fail it, it deeply compromises your ability to get a residency. You're in a hole. It's really hard to fix it. The problem is they don't feel confident what they're going to be asked. And so they've got all the resources. They've gone through UWorld twice, and they've memorized first aid, and they know perfectly well they can't read the questions. Boy, that's really anxiety engendering. They don't know what's expected. And they go into these questions just praying that there'll be some obvious hook that they'll recognize and know what they're looking for. Call it the buzzword. So the first thing I've got to do when I have a medical student is I've got to address that anxiety. And that happens through two ways. I mean, you think when I was doing my step one exam prep, I had 42 hours of lecturing. I got to promise you, after 2 years of studying, the chance that I'm going to impart enough information in 42 hours to make a difference is zero. What I can do is I can tell you how to organize the data that you have, and I can tell you it's going to be a patient-focused exam. So if I can do those two things, after that, you just need enough facts. And students have told me they go into the exam and they have moments where they laugh and they look up to see if everyone got the joke because the question is exactly the wording I used. And they look around because it's so obvious what was asked. But of course, the point is, it's not that I guessed the high-yield exam. It's that I know that's important in medicine and they have to ask it. So I believe that my major role in exam prep is making the students confident that they know the plan. And the second you know what's expected, man, everything deflates and you're just executing under pressure. It's really different. Here's the problem if you don't. Both anxiety and tension, you're drenched in cortisol and catecholamines. So you have two ways of handling that. Anxiety, the fog descends, you can't read, you get this bubbling of panic, and you're looking desperately for something to save you. When you feel it with tension, you take a big breath and you say, well, let's see what they're going to ask. Boy, the difference between knowing the plan and praying for a miracle is a totally different exam experience.
I'm listening to what you're saying, and it sounds like these students that have anxiety are trying to memorize all these disorganized facts. And what you're doing is you're laying a framework for how they can apply it and what to expect on the exam. And I think that was one of the mistakes, certainly that I made when I was going through school, is that I assumed that those students that were studying really hard and doing really well just had better brains than me. And they were just like, they just memorized better. And now that I've been working with you and now that I've read the textbook and we've been going through these videos, I don't think that's the case at all.
Oh, I promise you it's not the case. So I've mostly dealt with American students at Caribbean medical schools. And you go there because you're not a good exam taker, right? You don't have a high score on MCAT. You don't have a high GPA. So you're out of the conventional schools and you go there. So I've basically only worked with poor exam takers. And very recently, I've been working with a school that's just starting up, and they had to take the most exam weak students you've ever met in your life. And I got to work with them in 3 separate episodes so that they couldn't avoid me watching them and saying, no, we're not doing that. And when we came into the final 2 8-week review that we did, I thought at the beginning of that, perhaps of the 13 students, I thought perhaps 3 to 4 would pass step 1. 13 of 13 passed. And so, I'm now at a DO school, and they want me to work with students that have had failure. And my response is, oh, yeah, no, for sure, I can do that. And they sort of gave me the, okay, yeah, good for you, Mr. Wise Guy. But they were shocked when I pointed out to them, every one of your students is a better exam taker than any student I work with in the Caribbean. And so if you understand it's a clinical exam, meaning a patient walks in the door with this chief complaint, it has to be that. That's medicine. And then you have to say, what's the differential? And I'll show you how to do that. There's no magic to it, Allie. And then you got to understand the question's going to say, how is this patient's whatever, symptoms, signs, or test results based on a basic science principle? That's it. Now, I'm not saying that's not a lot, but I'm saying that's the plan. If you can organize your data that way, I will guarantee the result. I'll guarantee it. 13 of 13.
You mentioned these students are better test takers. These students are not as good test takers. What makes someone a good test taker? Is it like something that's just inherent? Is it something that we can all learn to become better?
For sure, we can all learn it, because I can get anyone to pass step 1. If you can master the basic facts and you can read and have any kind of mental function, you can pass it. There's a small number of students, they just can't make the association. So it's not, it's not like I can make anyone go through. With a certain minimum competence, though, it's about how can you read, can you read the question? This is one of the things I would say to students. When you read the STEM, imagine that we're standing in the ER and I'm your senior colleague and I say to you, hey, Allie, would you just go into room 28? There's a 28-year-old woman there. She's got this low-grade fever. She's complaining of pelvic pain and she has a discharge. Go in there and evaluate that patient and come on back and tell me what you found. That's 3/4 of your exam. It's not a trick. It's not anything. It's, can you in your mind run a clinical conversation? And then I'll say something to you like, well, what do you want to do next? Can you do a smear of the discharge? You could in a male, but not a female. Why? Do you think, what's the effect going to be if we don't find this and treat it? Well, now we're talking about scarring and infertility. What if, what is the single best test you could do to confirm that this is acute PID? The answer is the chandelier test. So, once I've given you the story, I can ask your understanding of why it looks like that based on basic science. Here's the other problem. Most of the schools come through teaching predominantly by PhDs. And so you just don't get that clinical feel. You can tell, no disrespect, but you can tell a question written by a PhD, it just clangs a bit. You sort of go, I wouldn't have said it that way, So you're going to see lots of schools where you get a lot of exposure to practicing physicians. Those students, by and large, aren't going to have trouble with exams. When you're sitting in a desk reading a book and you're not getting a lot of patient exposure, this becomes really critical.
Which I think is going to be such a benefit in our new community, because the students they're going to be taking their med school classes. They're going to have their clinical path textbook with you. They're going to have videos. They're going to have question bank answers. But to actually be able to go to an educator like yourself, to be able to test themselves and practice, I'd imagine will make them much better when it comes to exam time, to actually have those clinical conversations in their minds.
You know what I find very difficult to convince students? Just come and talk. They want, show me what to memorize, show me how to. I go, you don't understand. Learn the mind of a clinician. Learn how they think of things, the order they put things. Everything's not equally important. Just come and talk. You're learning in ways that you just can't imagine. A third of medicine is language. It's like you're going to say, no, I'm getting ready for my Spanish fluency exam, but I just don't want to go and talk for an hour Spanish. I'm going to memorize my book. Okay, just don't do that. Come and talk shop. So here's a good example of someone that's doing it right. I got pinged by a student who said, I just don't think I understand escape rhythms in arrhythmia. And what that says is, when your SA node or your regular beat stops beating, a new locus will take up. So the regular SA node, you escape from it and somewhere else picks up the rhythm. And so I didn't answer right away because I thought, what is she really asking here? And this is what I sent her back this morning. I said, well, I think this actually requires a video discussion, because I think you have to go back in your mind and say, can you regulate a contracting myocyte versus a conducting myocyte? Do you understand those two? Because if you can set up how they organize together, escape rhythms are just, of course that's true. But if you just want a quick and dirty, I'll give you a quick and dirty. Well, if you're anxious, you just want the facts. I just want to get the question right. But if you're saying, no, I'm building to be a good doctor, understanding a mental picture of the fundamental difference between a conducting myocyte and a contracting myocyte, if you set that up from architecture, cell, function, it'll always make sense to you. Everything makes sense to you. So I'm really looking forward to see what she answers.
Can you break down some of the key tips you would have that, or to start that clinical conversation in your mind, like starting with the patient or having a picture in your mind, any sort of key themes?
Let's talk about some of the ideas. Students always want the high yield facts. Let me promise you, there are no high yield facts. They really specifically avoid that on the exam. It's a fantastically good exam. Every student that's ever talked to me about the exam has said, it's a really fair exam. And I say, well, what do you mean by fair? They say, even the questions I got wrong, I recognize I should have known that. So they're not going to ask you, there's no trick questions. There's no, oh yeah, make sure you know the capital of that rare country. No, there's none of that. But of course, there are high yield diseases. You better know your diabetes really well. There are high yield concepts. Pretty sure you should know atherosclerosis really well. And then they will ask around it. So that's the first thing. There are high yield concepts. There are no high yield facts. Just don't. The second thing is this. You've got to be able to have a chief complaint and do a differential. That's just so fundamental to medical reasoning. When students ask me, am I ready to write the exam? I always say, go to the index in the book. There are 55 chief complaints. Can you go through them all? When you say, yep, I can do them all, you're ready to write the exam. The third thing I would tell them is, when you have anxiety, you've got to have a way to do it by how you practiced. You're going to bring to a high-tense situation your practice habits. If you see everything in words, I promise you words will fail you when it matters. Pictures never will. So if I say to you, left ventricular congestive heart failure, can you flip that little picture up? And then you take a big breath and go, okay, they're asking for what in this picture? When you're trying to hook two words together, that works really badly when you're anxious. The third thing is you've got to understand there is anxiety. The great danger of anxiety is you have to deal with it. You can't ignore it. It's so destructive to your body, you will. And the worst way to react to it is to go to ritualistic behaviors. Like I can walk through a med school and I see someone highlighting their book and I just want to slap the pen out of their hand.
I was a prolific highlighter, so I
Sure,
understand that.
it's a ritualistic behavior that makes you feeling that you're doing something. But of course, what you're really saying is, I should learn this at some point.
Yes.
Why don't
I'm
you
like,
just
I'll
learn
go
it?
back through and learn.
So that drives me berserk. The other thing students like is they like lists. They love mnemonics. I got to tell you, in all my teaching, I only have one mnemonic, only one. It's DENO, Dino. I was taught it by a neurologist back in the day, and it's for secondary causes of acute mental change. So it's drugs, endocrine, electrolytes, nutritional, organ failure. It's my only one. I've had it since I was a student. I've always liked it. It works. I don't forget it in the clutch. I don't do any other mnemonics. Instead, I say, what do you see in your mind's eye? Pictures will never fail you. So when I start taking on students who have failed, they are so desperate, they're willing to change. And I have to teach them how to draw pictures. I had one group of students that they could not qualify to get out of year 2. They just couldn't get 70% in their comp exam. And so they were delegated to me. So I was literally in this room with them every afternoon. And I was saying, okay, let's do the echo views of the heart. That's how everyone sees it. It's internal structure, really useful. And I literally went and drew a long axis view of the heart. And I said, okay, you go up and draw it. We're all sitting in this room, 10 of us. And he walked up with a piece of chalk and he said, I don't even know what line to draw. And I said, good, I will do it with you. And we literally, the first one, we drew it together and I explained what it meant. And then I made him practice it 10 times. And the reason I tell you this story is a week later, I saw him condescendingly lecture another student on what the long axis view of the heart is. So don't think it's obvious. Don't think it's natural. But once you do it, it's forever. It's really powerful.
Your short axis, long axis views of the heart, your drawings in your textbook are so instilled in my mind. And again,
Yes.
I didn't go to med school, just simply from working with you, producing your videos, and you do reference them a lot. And I can see how helpful they are just to have a clear picture of what it is you're talking about. So obviously we're talking about clinical reasoning when you're preparing for your exam. This ties into the fact that these exams are clinical exams. Can you elaborate on what that means?
Oh, so one of my favorite student quotes is, I met him, he prepped for step 1 and he passed. And I picked him up on the other side when I was doing a course for getting ready for clerkship. Turns out it's the same prep, so that was easy for me. And he came up and he said, I said, how was the exam? He said, well, it was fine. I passed, he said. But I believed you when you said it was a clinical exam. I just didn't understand what clinical meant.
Well, it's written by doctors.
Yes. Every question has to be proofed by a doctor. And what it means is it's always this sentence. Clinical medicine is built on a foundation of basic medical sciences. And then you can go to chapter 1 of the book and it discusses all the things. When we say completeness, when we say time frame, when we say all these things, prevalences, these are all the ideas of why. Why do you need that basic science fact in patient care? So if you say to me, hey, I don't need to understand the sarcomere when I do a contractile cardiac myocyte. And I would say to you, well, then how do you think about dystrophin and those little boys who can't get up anymore? How do you see that? The answer is, well, if you don't have a picture of the sarcomere, you've just got a bunch of words.
Yes.
Which I have in lots of areas of medicine. Don't think I'm sort of God's gift to all this. Whenever I go to teach and I suddenly go, wow, I don't know where to go from here, it's because I have a bunch of words.
you are rereading your own textbook a lot of times, you've mentioned, before you go into lecture.
Oh yeah. So, so I haven't done heart in a while. And now I've got to do these escape rhythms. I sort of went, escape rhythms. I sort of had to slow down and remind myself what that meant. And before I talk to that student, I promise you, I will sit down and I will write out the structure function of a contractile cardiac myocyte versus a conducting myocyte. And the first question I'm going to ask them is, what's the difference? And I promise you, they won't know. Guaranteed they won't know. And then I'm going to say, okay, conducting myocyte, what's the next word I want from you? Of course, no, I'm not a clue. The answer is automaticity. So that's, so once you can say those two things and those means data points, got it. Everything's easy.
We do have a video posted, by the way, that you guys should go check out on Dr. Tisdall's YouTube on structure function. So when he mentions that, absolutely go reference that video. Okay, so I'm a student. I've drunk the Kool-Aid. I'm thinking clinically now from a clinical perspective, and I feel like my anxiety is a lot lower.
Yeah.
But I have tension.
Yes.
Is that okay? Are there techniques of how to manage tension, or it's like tension is good?
You're always going to have some degree of anxiety. Don't feel like a failure because you've recognized that you have anxiety, you don't know what's expected, and you feel overwhelmed. All of us did that. One of my best friends in medical school, we were in second year. He's this fantastic student. I can tell you, he said, I can't do this anymore before class. He got up and he was walking to the elevator to the dean's office to quit. Well, of course, we all ran. We physically jumped him. We physically held him on our shoulders, him wiggling. Absolutely, we did this. You can ask him. And we sat him down and said, just don't be stupid. But he was so worn out, he was getting up in the middle of winter in Edmonton and going for long, cold path runs in the middle of the night because of his anxiety. I mean, he was going to be this wild British Columbia bush doctor. I mean, he was a rock and roll guy. So we all get this. So the first thing is, yes, it's real. The second is, it's extremely debilitating. You have to strengthen yourself for it. You have to do mindfulness. You have to do physical exercise. You have to manage your biology with diet and how much you're allowed to. You can't drink every day. You have to schedule rest. And one of the mistakes students make is they say, oh, I get to go do something really fun because I've earned it. No, you haven't. You get to go have fun because it recharges you. So don't kid yourself. We all have some component of anxiety. You're $150,000 in debt. Your whole culture, you're the first doctor out of your culture. Everyone's going to be, oh, my daughter, the doctor. Boy, I don't care how tough you are.
That's a lot of pressure.
That's not just tension when you're carrying that weight on your shoulders. So you've got to recognize it. You've got to manage your life around it. And then you've got to convert as much as you can to tension by saying, I've got to learn in pictures. I've got to be able to do the chief complaint. And every time I get anxious and I need a ritualistic behavior, I don't do non-productive things. I practice my differentials and I practice my pictures. So I'm going to give you ritualistic. It's not going to be rote that doesn't help you. It's going to be things that you'll say, here's the question. Oh, what picture are they looking for? That's how I do most of my multiple choice questions. I will say, where are we? What are they looking for? Oh, here's my chief complaint. Here's my differential. Oh, they're asking for that picture. Once you know that, then you just practice.
So now I'm a week out from my exam.
Ah, well.
What recommendations would you have for that final week or the final days leading up for your exam?
So here's the hardest advice you'll ever get. And I can only preface it by saying you have to be brave. Okay? You ready to be brave? You shouldn't do anything. You're going to write 2 years of information in a small number of questions. And they're going to be clinical questions. And so if you go into this cramming, there is no cramming, okay? If you go into this cramming, I promise you, you're looking for the thing that you just learned because that's what you feel best about. Instead of being everything down to neutral and stating, oh, what chief complaint have I am? Oh, what picture are they looking for? Can you read calmly and thoughtfully? So if you were brave enough, this is what you should do. You do not be around anyone who's anxious, and that includes your best friend who's really nervous. You only ever talk to your mother and father because they wish you well and they'll offer you these completely unhelpful platitudes. Oh, you'll be fine, honey. But they won't make you anxious. You should do, students tell me they can't. So here's what I tell them. Okay, the ritualistic behavior you're allowed to do one block of 40 questions. That's it. That'll take you an hour and it'll keep things trickling over in your thing if you got to do that. One of my very favorite students, I had allowed her to tape me when I was doing a week's review. And I told her she has to take 2 weeks off. She was a great student. We'll come back to this point. But what she did was listen to me talking. And I said, do you even hear what I said? She said, no, but I just knew there was this calm voice that was saying, this is how you think about joints. And, is it less than a week or more than 6 weeks? And she said, it was just so calming. I said, well, if you'd been brave, what would you do next time? She said, oh, I'd do it for 2 weeks, not one.
If any of you out there have done any kind of races, triathlons, marathons, any kind of training, you know that in your training plan, you are given a taper week or 2 weeks.
Taper!
It's one of the hardest things you can do. And this, I was a crammer in school, but I did taper for my races. And you're itchy and you're nervous and you're tense. But I tell you what, you go into that race and you got energy. And that's, I think, what we're talking about here.
Students have to believe this. You miss more questions because you didn't finish the block than you will ever miss because you didn't study that last week. Most of the easy questions missed from my students are because they ran out of time, and out of their block of 40 or 45 questions, they didn't actually see the last 5. It is really tiring. You've got to go in fresh, and the single most important thing is, can you read well? And when you're tired or you're anxious, you just don't.
If a stressed student is listening to this podcast right now, and they were going to change their study behavior tomorrow, what would be the very first step, in your opinion?
The first thing is to use your time really effectively. That's the single biggest mistake. So when you go to class and you hear the lecture, that's not stuff you're going to learn tonight. It's stuff you're learning right now. And while you're in that class hearing your lecture, that's a third of all you're learning. You are actively watching, you are organizing how you're going to learn it, you're paying attention to what's emphasized. Then that evening is your second block. You're going to organize your notes. This is my permanent way of learning this. This is the only way I'm going to learn it. The hardest part is I'm not including this. This is what I'm going to learn. You ready for the next thing? So having done your notes, this is all I'm going to learn on this. That's done. At the end of the night, you turn that page over and say, tell me what I just learned. And you keep going until you can do it perfectly. The next day, before you start the new stuff, you have to repeat it. So I could never study more than 2 hours, 45 minutes. My brain would sort of turn to porridge at that point. That's all I ever did in a given day. And of that 2 hours, 45, the first 45 minutes was blank page repeating the previous day. So every day, a third of my studying was repeating it in my brain. Then I'd have an hour. This is how I'm going to learn it. These are my permanent notes. This is all I'm going to do. And then the last 45 is repeating it until I could do it. So my roommate in first year had dyslexia, and we didn't know that till he hit first year med school. And he would study for 5 hours every night. I could never do more than 2.5, 3. And the next day we would walk to school together. And he had nothing in his head, literally nothing in his head because he couldn't read. So he spent 5 hours staring at the book, learning nothing. And I would then explain to him, because I'd sort of encapsulated it for myself, this is what you should have learned. And he was so friggin' smart that 30 minutes of oral teaching got him through first year med school. So it was really good for me because I had to say, well, what did I learn? And after a while, I started preparing for that. So time, manage your time. In class is your third of your learning. That night, no more than 3 hours. I don't believe it. If you tell me you can do more than 3 hours, I say, no, you can't. Then you say the first half an hour is repeating from a blank piece of paper. I don't want you going scanning and highlighting. No, 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 no. Can you bring it out? Is it recall, not recognition? Then the next hour is, this is what I'm going to learn. And then the last half hour is you repeat it. It's exhausting. If your brain doesn't feel like it's got liquid inside, you're not really studying hard. So I would study every night. I would take Friday night off. I would take Saturday off, and I would study a half day on Sunday. I'm pretty convinced no one spent less time studying in med school than me. But remember, performance equals talent times effort times directed effort squared. It's not how long you learn, it's how effectively you learned.
And that's something that I'd say these videos, as well as our community that is coming very soon, will be framing really beautifully. So if you guys are enjoying this video and you've enjoyed Dr. Tisdall's video so far, make sure you have hit that subscribe button. It's the best way to stay up to date. We will be announcing once the community is ready to go live. Right now, the website that's linked in our bio does have a ton of resources, question bank videos, but version 2.0 is coming as well, where we'll actually be going live with Dr. Tisdall, and he'll effectively be doing like small group sessions, lectures, that sort of thing within the app that we're building.
Yeah, and every time a student asks a question, I'm going to say, how do you think about? So one of the things you should be able to do is when I say, how do you think about, you can always tell. The memorizers look down and say, dear God, please divinely inspire me. And the people that have a mental picture look up because they're looking at their internal picture. So I can tell you exactly how a student learns. You just ask them a question and they look down or they look up. If you ask me a question, what do? I see it in my mind's eye.
Make sure to check out our most recent Dr. Tisdall Unfiltered episode as well, because we do go through how each chapter in your textbook or each subject in your textbook is written and how to really utilize the textbook in the most effective way. And we also talk about how to learn a disease from scratch, which I put it in quotations. You'll understand it once you see that video. As always, be sure to drop your questions in the comment section because we actually read them. We do answer them in these videos. And Dr. Tisdall, it's been a pleasure. We'll see you next time.
Thanks a lot, Allie. Talk soon.